The Echoing Realms, Episode 1, The First Echo. A magical adventure audiobook series, written by Manus AI. Chapter 1, The Guidance Counselor's Office. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with their familiar, irritating buzz as Lyra Nightwhisper shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair across from Mrs. Henderson's desk. The guidance counselor's office smelled of stale coffee and artificial air freshener, a combination that always made Lyra's stomach turn. Through the thin walls, she could hear the muffled sounds of her high school's afternoon activities, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on linoleum, the distant echo of the marching band practicing in the gymnasium. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, and flipped through a manila folder thick with incident reports. Each page represented another moment when Lyra had been caught spacing out during class, muttering to herself, or reacting to things that no one else could see or hear. "Lyra," Mrs. Henderson began, her voice carrying that particular tone adults used when they thought they were being understanding but were actually just patronizing. "Your teachers are concerned about you. This is the 4th time this month that you've had what they're calling episodes during class." Lyra stared at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. Her fingernails were bitten down to the quick, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past few years as the voices, the whispers, the strange visions had grown stronger and more frequent. She could feel Mrs. Henderson's expectant gaze boring into the top of her head, waiting for an explanation that Lyra couldn't possibly give without sounding completely insane. "I know you think I'm crazy," Lyra said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone does." "No one thinks you're crazy, dear," Mrs. Henderson replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But we are worried about you. Your grades have been slipping, you don't seem to have many friends, and these incidents are becoming more frequent. Have you been under any unusual stress at home? Sometimes teenagers act out when they're dealing with family problems or social pressures." Lyra almost laughed at the absurdity of it. If only it were that simple. If only she could blame her problems on typical teenage drama or family dysfunction. But her parents were loving and supportive, even if they didn't understand what was happening to their daughter. Her home life was stable, boring even. The problem wasn't her environment, it was her. "There's nothing wrong at home," Lyra said, finally looking up to meet Mrs. Henderson's concerned gaze. "And I'm not acting out. I'm just different." Mrs. Henderson leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Different how, Lyra? Help me understand what you're experiencing." For a moment, Lyra considered telling the truth. She imagined explaining how she could hear voices whispering in languages she didn't recognize, how she sometimes saw flashes of impossible places. Forests where the trees glowed with their own inner light, caverns filled with singing crystals, islands floating in endless skies. She pictured describing the way shadows sometimes moved independently of their owners, or how certain people seemed to shimmer around the edges as if they weren't quite solid. But she tried explaining before to her parents, to teachers, even to a therapist her mother had taken her to see last year. Each time, the result was the same: concerned looks, hushed conversations, and suggestions about medication or getting help. No one believed her because what she experienced was impossible. Magic wasn't real. Parallel worlds didn't exist. 16-year-old girls from suburban neighborhoods didn't have mystical abilities. "I hear things," Lyra said finally, choosing her words carefully. "Voices, sometimes. And I see flashes of places that don't exist. I know how that sounds, but I'm not making it up. I'm not trying to get attention or cause problems. It just happens." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, making notes in Lyra's file. "These voices and visions, do they tell you to do things? Do they ever seem threatening or frightening?" "No," Lyra said quickly. "They're not like that. They're more like echoes. Like hearing a conversation from another room, but you can't quite make out the words, or seeing a reflection in water that shows something different from what's actually there. Echoes, Mrs. Henderson repeated, writing the word down. That's an interesting way to describe it. Lyra, I think it might be helpful for you to speak with someone who specializes in these kinds of experiences. There are medications that can help with auditory and visual hallucinations, and therapy can teach you coping strategies. There it was, the word Lyra had been dreading. Hallucinations. As if everything she experienced could be dismissed with a clinical term and treated with pills. She felt a familiar surge of frustration and loneliness, the same feeling that had been her constant companion for the past 3 years as her abilities had grown stronger. "I'm not hallucinating," Lyra said, her voice firmer now. "I know the difference between imagination and reality. What I've experienced is real, even if no one else can see or hear it." Mrs. Henderson's expression grew more concerned. "Lyra, I understand that these experiences feel very real to you. That's exactly why we need to get you some help. The mind can play tricks on us, especially when we're under stress or going through hormonal changes. There's no shame in needing support." Lyra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "May I go now? I have to catch my bus." "Of course," Mrs. Henderson said, though she looked like she wanted to continue the conversation. "But Lyra, I'm going to call your parents this evening. We need to discuss some options for getting you the support you need." Lyra nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the guidance office. As she reached for the handle, Mrs. Henderson called out to her, "Lyra, for what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're a bright, sensitive young woman who's going through a difficult time. But you don't have to go through it alone." Lyra paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Mrs. Henderson did understand, at least a little. Maybe there was someone who could help her make sense of what was happening to her. But then she heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, seeming to come from the air conditioning vent above Mrs. Henderson's desk. The voice spoke in a language Lyra didn't recognize, but somehow she understood its meaning. The barriers grow thin. The echo walker stirs. Soon, very soon, Lyra's blood ran cold. She glanced at Mrs. Henderson, who was still looking at her with concern, completely oblivious to the otherworldly voice that had just spoken. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. "Find the ancient oak. When the moon rises full, the path will open." "Lyra?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Are you all right? You look pale." Lyra forced a smile and opened the door. "I'm fine. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Henderson." She fled the office before the guidance counselor could respond, her heart pounding as the mysterious voice echoed in her mind. The ancient oak, she knew exactly which tree the voice meant. There was an enormous oak tree in Riverside Park, just a few blocks from her house. Local legend claimed it was over 300 years old, a survivor from the time when the area had been nothing but wilderness. Lyra had always felt drawn to that tree, though she'd never understood why. As she hurried through the school hallways, dodging other students and trying to look normal, Lyra's mind raced. The voice had been clearer than any she'd heard before, and its message had been specific. Tonight was the full moon. If she went to the oak tree after moonrise, something would happen. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was exactly the kind of thinking that had landed her in the guidance counselor's office in the first place. Following mysterious voices to deserted parks at night was not the behavior of a mentally stable person. But the other part of her mind, the part that had been growing stronger over the past few years, whispered that this might finally be her chance to get answers. For too long, she'd been passive, simply enduring the strange experiences without trying to understand them. Maybe it was time to take action, to seek out the source of the voices and visions that had made her feel like an outsider in her own life. As Lyra pushed through the school's front doors and stepped into the crisp October afternoon, she made a decision. Tonight, when the moon rose full over Riverside Park, she would go to the ancient oak tree. Whatever was waiting for her there, whatever was waiting for her there, whatever the voice had meant by the path will open, she was ready to face it. She just hoped she was strong enough to handle whatever she might find. Chapter 2. The Weight of Secrets. The Nightwhisper family lived in a modest, two-story colonial house on Maple Street, with a small front yard dominated by her mother's carefully tended flower garden and a white picket fence that had seen better days. As Lyra walked up the familiar path to her front door, she could smell the aroma of her mother's famous pot roast drifting through the kitchen window. It was a comforting, normal smell that made her feel guilty about the decision she'd made at school. Her parents, David and Sarah Nightwhisper, were good people who loved their daughter deeply, even if they didn't understand her. David worked as an accountant for a local firm, while Sarah taught third grade at the elementary school across town. They were practical, down-to-earth people who believed in logic, reason, and the power of hard work to solve most problems. The idea that their daughter might be experiencing something genuinely supernatural was so far outside their worldview that they couldn't even consider it as a possibility. Lyra found her mother in the kitchen, stirring a pot of gravy while humming softly to herself. Sarah Nightwhisper was a petite woman with auburn hair that she wore in a practical bob and kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She looked up as Lyra entered, her expression immediately shifting to one of concern. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be entirely positive. "It was fine," Lyra replied automatically, dropping her backpack by the kitchen table and grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. It was the same lie she'd been telling for months, and they both knew it. Sarah set down her wooden spoon and turned to face her daughter fully. "Mrs. Henderson called about 20 minutes ago. She said you had another episode during chemistry class today." Lyra's heart sank. She'd hoped to have at least a few hours before this conversation became inevitable. "It wasn't an episode, Mom. I just got distracted for a minute." "Distracted by what, honey?" Sarah's voice was gentle but persistent. "Your teacher said you were staring at the corner of the classroom and whispering to yourself. When she called your name, you didn't respond for almost a full minute." Lyra took a bite of her apple, buying herself time to think. How could she explain that she'd been watching a shadow creature that no one else could see? A writhing mass of darkness that had been feeding on the fear and anxiety of her classmates. How could she tell her mother that the whispers hadn't been a random muttering, but an attempt to communicate with the creature, to understand what it wanted? "I was just thinking about something," Lyra said finally. "Sometimes I get lost in my thoughts. It's not a big deal." Sarah moved closer, reaching out to brush a strand of dark hair away from Lyra's face. "Sweetheart, I know you think we don't understand, but your father and I are worried about you. These incidents are happening more frequently, and Mrs. Henderson thinks it might be helpful for you to talk to someone. A professional." "You mean a psychiatrist," Lyra said flatly. "A therapist," Sarah corrected gently. "Someone who specializes in helping teenagers work through difficult periods in their lives. There's nothing wrong with needing support, Lyra. Everyone goes through challenging times." Lyra felt a familiar surge of frustration. Her parents meant well, but they were trying to solve a supernatural problem with mundane solutions. No amount of therapy or medication could change the fact that she could see and hear things from other worlds. If anything, trying to suppress her abilities might make them stronger and more unpredictable. "What if I told you that what I'm experiencing isn't a mental health issue?" Lyra asked, setting down her apple and looking directly at her mother. "What if I told you that I can see and hear things that are actually there, just not in the way most people understand reality?" Sarah's expression grew more concerned. "Lyra, honey, I know these experiences feel very real to you. That's exactly why we need to get you some help. The mind can create very convincing illusions, especially when we're under stress. But what if they're not illusions? Lyra pressed. What if there are things in this world that most people can't perceive, but some people can? What if I'm not sick, but different? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. Finally, she reached out and took Lyra's hands in hers. Sweetheart, I love you more than anything in this world. If you could really see and hear things that others can't, if you had some kind of special ability, don't you think I would want to believe that? Don't you think it would be wonderful if my daughter was gifted in some extraordinary way? Lyra felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She could hear the pain in her mother's voice, the desperate wish that there could be a magical explanation for her daughter's struggles. But the truth is, Sarah continued, sometimes our minds play tricks on us. Sometimes we want so badly to be special, to be different from everyone else, that we convince ourselves we're experiencing things that aren't really there. And that's okay, Lyra. You don't need to have supernatural abilities to be special. You're already extraordinary just by being you. The tears spilled over then, running down Lyra's cheeks as she realized the impossible position she was in. Her mother loved her and wanted to help, but the help she was offering would only make things worse. How could Lyra explain that she didn't want to be different, that she would give anything to be a normal teenager who worried about grades and boys and college applications instead of shadow creatures and mysterious voices? I know you're trying to help, Lyra said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And I love you for it, but I need you to trust me when I tell you that what I'm experiencing is real, not delusional, and I'm not making it up for attention. I'm just different. Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, and Lyra could feel her mother's tears dampening her hair. I want to trust you, sweetheart. I want to believe you, but I'm scared. I'm scared that if we don't get you help, things will get worse. I'm scared that you'll hurt yourself or that you'll become so lost in these experiences that we won't be able to reach you. Lyra hugged her mother back, feeling the weight of all the secrets she was carrying. She wanted to tell Sarah everything about the voices that spoke in ancient languages, about the glimpses of impossible worlds, about the growing certainty that she was meant for something beyond the ordinary life her parents had planned for her. But she knew that sharing those secrets would only cause more pain and worry. I won't hurt myself, Lyra promised, and I won't get lost. I'm stronger than you think I am. Sarah pulled back to look at her daughter's face, searching for reassurance. Promise me that if things get worse, if these experiences become frightening or overwhelming, you'll tell us immediately. Promise me you won't try to handle this alone. Lyra nodded, though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. I promise. They were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and David Nightwhisper's voice calling out, I'm home. Something smells amazing in here. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and turned back to the stove, stirring the gravy with perhaps more vigor than necessary. We're in the kitchen, honey. Dinner will be ready in about 10 minutes. David appeared in the doorway, a tall, thin man with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He worked long hours at the accounting firm, but he always made time for his family. He looked between his wife and daughter, immediately sensing the tension in the room. Everything okay in here? He asked, loosening his tie. Everything's fine, Sarah said quickly. Lyra and I were just talking about her day at school. David's expression grew more serious. Mrs. Henderson called my office this afternoon. She said there was another incident during chemistry class. Lyra felt her stomach drop. She'd hoped to avoid having this conversation twice in one evening. It wasn't a big deal, Dad. I just got distracted for a minute. Lyra, David said, his voice gentle but firm. Your mother and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider some professional help. Mrs. Henderson gave us the name of a therapist who specializes in working with teenagers. Dr. Martinez has an excellent reputation, and she's helped a lot of young people work through similar challenges. Similar challenges? Lyra repeated. You mean other kids who see and hear things that aren't supposed to exist? David and Sarah exchanged a look, and Lyra could see the worry and confusion in their eyes. They were good parents who wanted to do right by their daughter, but they were completely out of their depth. Lyra, David said carefully, we know you believe that what you're experiencing is real. But sometimes our minds can create very convincing experiences that feel completely authentic, even when they're not based in objective reality. It doesn't mean you're crazy or weak. It just means you need some support to work through whatever is causing these experiences. Lyra felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She was tired of having the same conversation over and over, tired of trying to convince people that her experiences were genuine, tired of feeling like an outsider in her own family. Maybe it would be easier to just agree to see the therapist, to pretend that medication could solve her problems, to try to suppress the abilities that made her different. But then she heard it again, the whisper, faint but unmistakable, seeming to come from the air itself. The moon rises. The path awaits. Do not let fear silence the truth within you. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the kitchen for the source of the voice. Her parents were still looking at her with concern, completely oblivious to the otherworldly message that had just been delivered. Did you hear that? Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. Hear what, sweetheart? Sarah asked. The voice came again, more urgent this time. Tonight, Echo Walker. Tonight, you will understand. Lyra's heart began to race. The voice was calling her by a name she'd never heard before, Echo Walker. Somehow, she knew that this title was significant, that it described not just what she could do, but what she was meant to become. I need to go for a walk, Lyra said suddenly, standing up from the table. Now? David asked. It's almost dinner time, and it's getting dark outside. I just need some fresh air, Lyra said, grabbing her jacket from the back of her chair. I'll be back in an hour or two. Lyra, wait, Sarah called out, but her daughter was already heading for the front door. I love you both, Lyra called back. And I'm sorry for worrying you, but I need to do this. She was out the door before her parents could stop her, leaving them standing in the kitchen with expressions of bewilderment and growing alarm. As she walked quickly down Maple Street toward Riverside Park, Lyra could hear her mother calling her name from the front porch, but she didn't turn back. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the full moon was already visible as a pale disk in the darkening heavens. Lyra pulled her jacket tighter around herself and quickened her pace. Whatever was waiting for her at the ancient oak tree, whatever the voice meant by calling her an echo walker, she was about to find out. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving toward answers instead of running away from questions. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Chapter 3: The Ancient Oak. Riverside Park was a sprawling green space that served as the heart of Lyra's suburban neighborhood. During the day, it was filled with joggers, dog walkers, families with young children, and teenagers playing frisbee or basketball. But as evening settled over the park, it took on a different character entirely. The familiar paths became shadowy and mysterious, and the sounds of the nearby residential streets seemed muffled and distant. Lyra had always loved the park at night, despite her parents' warnings about staying out after dark. There was something peaceful about the way moonlight filtered through the trees, creating patterns of silver and shadow on the ground. The night sounds, owls hooting, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant hum of traffic, formed a symphony that spoke to something deep in her soul. The ancient oak tree stood in a clearing near the center of the park, its massive trunk easily 6 feet in diameter, and its branches spreading out like the arms of a giant embracing the sky. Local historians estimated that the tree was at least 300 years old, making it one of the oldest living things in the area. It had survived storms, droughts, urban development, and countless seasons of change, standing as a silent witness to the passage of time. As Lyra approached the tree, she felt the familiar tingle of recognition that she'd experienced every time she'd visited this spot over the years. There was something special about this place, something that called to her in a way she'd never been able to explain. Tonight, with the full moon casting everything in silver light, that feeling was stronger than ever. She placed her hand on the rough bark of the oak's trunk, feeling the life force that pulsed within the ancient wood. The tree was old, older than the town around it, older than the memories of anyone still living. It had roots that went deep into the earth and branches that reached toward the stars. Standing next to it, Lyra felt both insignificant and connected to something vast and eternal. "I'm here," she whispered to the night air. "I heard your voice and I came. What do you want from me?" For a moment, nothing happened. The park remained quiet except for the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Lyra began to wonder if she'd made a mistake, if the voice she'd heard had been nothing more than her imagination after all. Maybe her parents were right. Maybe she was just a troubled teenager who needed professional help. But then the whispers began. At first, they were so faint that Lyra thought they might be the wind moving through the oak's branches. But gradually, they grew clearer and more distinct. Multiple voices, speaking in languages she didn't recognize but somehow understood, all seeming to come from the tree itself. "She has come," one voice said, "ancient and wise. The Echo Walker awakens," said another, younger and more excited. "The barriers grow thin," whispered a third, filled with urgency. "The time of choosing approaches." Lyra pressed her ear against the bark, trying to understand what the voices were telling her. As she did, she noticed something strange happening to the tree's surface. The rough bark seemed to be shifting and changing, becoming smoother and more reflective. What had been solid wood moments before now looked like the surface of a dark pool, rippling with inner light. "What's happening?" Lyra breathed, stepping back in amazement. The voices grew louder and more insistent. "Step through, Echo Walker. Cross the threshold. Your destiny awaits in the Whispering Woods." Lyra stared at the transformed tree trunk, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. The bark had become completely transparent now, revealing not the interior of the tree, but what looked like another world entirely. Through the portal, she could see a forest unlike any she'd ever imagined. Trees with silver bark and leaves that glowed with their own inner light, flowers that chimed like bells in the breeze, and paths that seemed to be made of crystallized moonlight. "This is impossible," Lyra whispered, but even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. This was exactly what she'd been waiting for her entire life. Proof that the voices and visions she'd experienced were real, that there were indeed other worlds beyond the mundane reality that everyone else accepted as the only truth. She reached out tentatively, her fingers approaching the shimmering surface of the portal. The moment her skin made contact with the transformed bark, she felt a jolt of energy that ran through her entire body. The world around her seemed to shift and blur, and suddenly she was no longer standing in Riverside Park. Lyra found herself in the middle of the glowing forest she'd seen through the portal, surrounded by trees that hummed with ancient magic. The air itself seemed alive, sparkling with tiny motes of light that danced around her like fireflies. The ground beneath her feet was soft and springy, covered with moss that glowed faintly blue-green in the eternal twilight of this realm. "Welcome to the Whispering Woods," said a voice behind her. Lyra spun around to find herself face to face with a young man who appeared to be about her own age. He had auburn hair that seemed to catch and reflect the magical light around them, and eyes the color of deep forest pools. He was dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged in a fantasy novel. A tunic of forest green, leather boots that came up to his knees, and a cloak that seemed to be woven from moonbeams and shadow. "Who are you?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The young man smiled, and Lyra noticed that his ears came to subtle points at the tips. "My name is Finn," he said. I'm a guardian in training, and I've been waiting for you for a very long time." "Waiting for me? But you don't even know who I am." "Oh, but I do," Finn said, his expression growing more serious. "You're a Lyra Nightwhisper, the first Echo Walker to be born in over a century. You're the one who can hear the voices between worlds, who can see the magic that others cannot perceive. You're the one the prophecy spoke of." Lyra felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what she was experiencing. Prophecies? Echo Walker? I don't understand any of this. An hour ago, I was sitting in my kitchen with my parents, and now I'm in some kind of magical forest talking to someone who looks like he stepped out of a fairy tale. Finn's expression softened with sympathy. "I know this is overwhelming. The transition from the mundane world to the magical realms is never easy, especially for someone who's been suppressing their abilities for so long. But you're safe here, Lyra. The Whispering Woods are under the protection of the Guardians, and nothing can harm you while you're in our care." "Guardians?" Lyra repeated. "What are Guardians?" "We're the protectors of the balance between worlds," Finn explained. "For thousands of years, we've maintained the barriers that keep the different realms separate and stable. But something has gone wrong. The barriers are failing, and creatures from the darker realms are beginning to cross over into your world." As if summoned by his words, a chill wind began to blow through the glowing forest. The light from the trees dimmed, and the cheerful chiming of the magical flowers became a discordant wail. Finn's expression grew tense, and he placed a protective hand on Lyra's shoulder. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Shadow wraiths," Finn said grimly. "They've found us. They must have sensed you're crossing into our realm." Through the trees, Lyra could see dark shapes moving toward them, creatures that seemed to be made of living shadow, with glowing red eyes and claws that left trails of darkness in the air. They moved with unnatural speed and grace, flowing between the trees like liquid night. "What do they want?" Lyra asked, backing closer to Finn. "You," Finn said simply. "Echo Walkers are incredibly rare and powerful. There are forces in the darker realms that would do anything to capture one and use their abilities for evil purposes." The shadow wraiths were getting closer now, and Lyra could hear their voices, harsh whispers that spoke of hunger and malice. Unlike the gentle voices she'd heard from the oak tree, these sounds filled her with dread and revulsion. "What do we do?" Lyra asked. Finn drew what looked like a sword made of crystallized light from a sheath at his side. "We fight," he said. "But first, I need to teach you how to use your abilities." "You're not helpless, Lyra. You have power beyond anything these creatures can imagine. You just need to learn how to access it." "I don't know how to fight magical creatures," Lyra protested. "I don't know how to use whatever abilities you think I have." "Yes, you do," Finn said firmly. "You've been using them your whole life, just not consciously. The voices you hear, the visions you see, that's your Echo Walker ability manifesting. You can perceive the connections between all things, the threads of magic that bind the realms together. Focus on that now. Listen for the echoes." The shadow wraiths were almost upon them now, their red eyes blazing with malevolent hunger. Lyra closed her eyes and tried to do what Finn had suggested, reaching out with senses she'd never consciously used before. Immediately, she was overwhelmed by a flood of information. She could hear the life songs of every tree in the forest, feel the pulse of magic that flowed through the ground beneath her feet, sense the ancient power that protected this realm. But she could also perceive the shadow wraiths with startling clarity. They weren't truly alive in the way that she understood life. They were constructs of negative energy, beings of pure malice and hunger that existed only to consume and destroy. And she could sense their weakness. They were vulnerable to light, to joy, to the positive emotions that they sought to devour. "I can see them," Lyra whispered, opening her eyes. "I can see what they really are." "Good," Finn said. "Now, can you hear the song of the forest? Can you feel the protective magic that flows through this place?" Lyra nodded, amazed by the symphony of magical energy that surrounded them. It was like being able to see color for the first time after a lifetime of blindness. "Then call to it," Finn instructed. "Ask the forest to help us." As an echo walker, you can communicate with the magic itself. The shadow wraiths were only yards away now, their claws extended and their mouths open in silent screams of hunger. Lyra reached out with her newfound abilities, speaking not with her voice, but with her mind and heart. "Help us," she called to the forest. "Protect us from these creatures of darkness." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every tree in the clearing began to glow brighter, their light becoming so intense that the shadow wraiths recoiled with shrieks of pain and fury. The magical flowers chimed in harmony, creating a sound so pure and beautiful that it seemed to physically push the dark creatures back. But the most amazing thing was what happened to Lyra herself. She felt the forest's magic flowing through her, connecting her to every living thing in the realm. She was no longer just a confused teenager from the mundane world. She was part of something vast and ancient and wonderful. The shadow wraiths, unable to withstand the combined light and music of the awakened forest, dissolved into wisps of dark smoke that were quickly dispersed by the magical wind. In moments, the clearing was peaceful again, filled with gentle light and the soft chiming of contented flowers. Finn lowered his crystal sword and turned to Lyra with an expression of amazement and respect. "That was incredible," he said. "I've never seen a new Echo Walker adapt so quickly to their abilities. You have tremendous natural talent." Lyra felt a surge of pride and accomplishment unlike anything she'd ever experienced. For the first time in her life, her differences had been an asset rather than a liability. She'd used her abilities to protect herself and help someone else, and it had felt completely natural and right. "What happens now?" she asked. Finn's expression grew serious again. "Now we need to talk about why the shadow wraiths were able to cross into this realm in the first place. The barriers between worlds are failing, Lyra, and if we can't find a way to restore them, creatures far worse than shadow wraiths will begin pouring into your world. The balance that has protected all the realms for thousands of years is in danger of collapsing entirely." "And you think I can help stop that from happening?" "I don't think it," Finn said solemnly. "I know it. You're the Echo Walker the prophecy spoke of, the one who will either save all the realms or watch them fall into chaos. The choice and the power to make it happen is yours." As Lyra stood in the magical clearing, surrounded by glowing trees and the lingering echoes of the forest's protective song, she realized that her life had just changed forever. There was no going back to the mundane world of high school and guidance counselors and parents who thought she needed therapy. She was part of something bigger now, something that would require courage and strength she wasn't sure she possessed. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She had found her purpose, her place in the grand tapestry of existence. She was an Echo Walker, a bridge between worlds, and the fate of all reality might depend on the choices she made in the days to come. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a sense of destiny and determination that burned bright as the magical lights surrounding them. Chapter 4: The Echo Walker's Awakening. The magical clearing in the Whispering Woods had become a sanctuary of soft light and gentle sounds, but Lyra could sense that their moment of peace was temporary. Finn stood beside her, his crystal sword now sheathed but his posture still alert, scanning the glowing forest for any signs of additional threats. "Tell me about these prophecies," Lyra said, settling onto a moss-covered log that seemed to pulse with its own inner warmth. "If I'm really this Echo Walker you keep talking about, I need to understand what that means." Finn nodded and sat across from her on a boulder that sparkled like a giant gemstone. "The prophecies are ancient, passed down through generations of guardians. They speak of a time when the barriers between realms would begin to fail, when creatures of darkness would threaten to overrun all the worlds. In that time of crisis, an Echo Walker would be born, someone with the ability to hear the voice of magic itself, to communicate with the fundamental forces that bind reality together. And you think that's me? Lyra asked, though even as she spoke the words, she felt their truth resonating in her bones. I know it's you, Finn said with quiet certainty. What you did just now, calling upon the forest's magic to drive away the shadow wraiths, that's not something that can be taught. It's an innate ability that only Echo Walkers possess. You didn't just use magic, Lyra. You spoke to it, communicated with it as if it were a living thing. Lyra thought about the experience, remembering how natural it had felt to reach out with her mind and heart to the magical energy around them. It had been like discovering a language she'd always known but never consciously spoken. But why are the barriers failing? She asked. What's causing this crisis? Finn's expression darkened. That's a long and complicated story, but the short version is this. Long ago, there were 7 guardians who maintained the balance between all the realms. They used an artifact called the Harmony Stone to regulate the flow of magic and keep the barriers stable. But one of the guardians, a powerful mage named Malachar, became corrupted by his exposure to the darker realms. He tried to use the Harmony Stone to merge all the worlds under his control. What happened to him? The other guardians were forced to stop him, but the battle shattered the Harmony Stone and scattered its pieces across the realms. Malachar was banished to the void between worlds, a place of pure chaos where he's been imprisoned ever since. But the barriers that were created to contain him were never meant to be permanent. They've been slowly weakening over the centuries, and now they're on the verge of complete collapse. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. And if they collapse completely, chaos. Finn said simply, creatures from the darkest realms will pour into your world and all the others. The shadow wraiths you just encountered are nothing compared to what's waiting in the deeper darkness. Without the barriers, there will be no protection, no order, no safety anywhere. So what can we do about it? Finn leaned forward, his eyes bright with hope and determination. The prophecies say that an Echo Walker will be able to find the scattered pieces of the Harmony Stone and reassemble them. With this stone restored, the barriers can be rebuilt and strengthened. But it won't be easy. Lyra, the fragments are hidden in the most dangerous places across all the realms, and there are forces working to prevent their recovery. Forces like Malachar? Malachar and his servants, yes, but also others who benefit from the current chaos. There are creatures and beings who thrive in the spaces between worlds, who grow stronger as the barriers weaken. They'll do everything in their power to stop you. Lyra stood up and began pacing around the clearing, her mind racing as she tried to process everything she'd learned. A few hours ago, her biggest worry had been convincing her parents that she wasn't mentally ill. Now she was being told that the fate of multiple worlds might depend on her ability to find magical artifacts and restore cosmic balance. This is insane, she said, running her hands through her hair. I'm 16 years old. I've never been in a real fight. I don't know anything about magic, and I can barely handle my own life, let alone save multiple worlds. But you're not alone, Finn said, standing to face her. The Guardians will help you. I'll help you. And you have abilities that no one else possesses. You're stronger than you know, Lyra. How can you be so sure? Finn smiled, and for a moment he looked less like a mystical guardian and more like the teenager he appeared to be. Because you're here. Despite years of being told that your experiences weren't real, despite everyone around you trying to convince you that you needed to be fixed, you never stopped believing in what you could see and hear. You followed the voices to the oak tree tonight, even though it meant defying your parents and risking your safety. That takes incredible courage and strength of will. Lyra felt a warm glow of pride at his words, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of practical concerns. What about my parents? They're probably calling the police right now, reporting me as a missing person. And what about school? I can't just disappear from my normal life without consequences. Time moves differently between the realms, Finn explained. What feels like hours here might only be minutes in your world. And as your abilities grow stronger, you'll learn to move between worlds more easily. You won't have to abandon your normal life completely, at least not at first. At first. Finn's expression grew more serious. Eventually, as you grow into your role as an Echo Walker, you'll find that the mundane world feels less and less like home. Most Echo Walkers eventually choose to live primarily in the magical realms, serving as ambassadors and protectors. But that's a choice for the future. Right now, you need to focus on learning to control your abilities and understanding the scope of the challenge ahead. A new voice spoke from the edge of the clearing, ancient and wise. The young guardian speaks truly, Echo Walker. But the hour grows late, and there are those in your world who worry for your safety. Lyra turned to see a figure emerging from between the glowing trees, an elderly woman with silver hair that seemed to be woven from moonlight itself. She wore robes that shifted color like the aurora borealis, and her eyes held the depth of centuries. Elder Sage Thorn, Finn said, bowing respectfully. I was just explaining to Lyra about her role as an Echo Walker. And doing well, young one, Thorn said with a gentle smile. But our new friend must return to her world soon, before her absence causes undue alarm. There will be time for more detailed explanations in the days to come. Lyra felt a pang of disappointment. She had so many questions, so much she wanted to understand about this new world she'd discovered. But she knew Thorn was right. Her parents were probably frantic with worry by now. How do I get back? She asked. The same way you came, Thorn said. The oak tree in your world is a permanent gateway, one of several that exist between the realms. As an Echo Walker, you'll always be able to find it and use it to travel between worlds. And when will I see you again? Lyra asked, looking at Finn. Soon, he promised. Tomorrow night, if you're willing. There's much more you need to learn, and time is not on our side. The barriers grow weaker with each passing day. Thorn approached Lyra and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Before you go, child, I have something for you. She reached into her robes and withdrew a pendant on a silver chain, a crystal that seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light. This is an echo stone, Thorn explained as she placed the chain around Lyra's neck. It will help you focus your abilities and protect you from those who would do you harm. But be warned, wearing it will make you visible to all magical beings, both friend and foe. Use it wisely. Lyra felt the pendant settle against her chest, warm and comforting. Immediately, her perception of the magical world around her became even clearer and more detailed. She could sense the life force of every plant and creature in the forest, feel the ebb and flow of magical currents like invisible rivers of power. Thank you, she said, touched by the gift and the trust it represented. Thank you, Echo Walker, Thorn replied, for answering the call, for embracing your destiny, and for giving us hope that the darkness can be held at bay. Finn led Lyra back through the glowing forest to where the portal waited, a shimmering doorway that showed her the familiar sight of Riverside Park on the other side. The ancient oak tree stood waiting, its bark once again solid and normal, looking from this side of the threshold. Remember, Finn said as they stood before the portal, what happened tonight was real. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Trust in your abilities, trust in your abilities, trust in yourself, and trust that you're not alone in this fight. Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of the Echo Stone pendant against her chest and the even greater weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I'll be back tomorrow night, she promised. I'll be waiting, Finn said with a smile. Lyra stepped through the portal and found herself back in the familiar surroundings of Riverside Park. The transition was jarring. One moment she was surrounded by magical light and the music of enchanted flowers. The next she was standing in the ordinary darkness of a suburban park. For a moment, she wondered if the entire experience had been an elaborate hallucination. But then she felt the echo stone pendant beneath her shirt, warm against her skin, and she knew that everything she'd experienced was real. She was an echo walker, a bridge between worlds, and her life would never be the same. As she walked home through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, Lyra's mind buzzed with everything she'd learned. The voices she'd heard all her life weren't symptoms of mental illness. They were her magical abilities manifesting. The visions of impossible places weren't hallucinations. They were glimpses of other realms. She wasn't broken or crazy or in need of fixing. She was exactly what she was meant to be. The lights were on in her house when she arrived, and she could see her parents pacing anxiously in the living room. She took a deep breath, touched the hidden pendant for courage, and opened the front door. "Lyra," her mother cried, rushing to embrace her. "Where have you been? We were so worried." "I'm sorry," Lyra said, hugging her parents tightly. "I just needed some time to think. I'm okay, I promise." As she looked into their concerned faces, Lyra felt a pang of sadness. They loved her and wanted to protect her, but they could never understand the truth about what she was becoming. She would have to find a way to balance her two worlds, the mundane life of a suburban teenager and the magical destiny of an echo walker. But for tonight, she was content to be home, safe in the love of her family, with the secret knowledge that she was part of something far greater than anyone could imagine. Tomorrow night, she would return to the Whispering Woods and continue her education in the ways of magic. But tonight, she was simply Lyra Nightwhisper, the 16-year-old girl who had just discovered that the impossible was not only possible, but that she was destined to be at the center of it all. As she lay in bed later that night, the echo stone pendant hidden beneath her pajamas, Lyra could hear the whispers more clearly than ever before. But now, instead of frightening her, they filled her with anticipation and purpose. She was an echo walker, and her greatest adventures were just beginning. The first echo had been heard. The journey into magic had begun. End of episode 1, The First Echo. Next time on the Echoing Realms, Lyra returns to the Whispering Woods to begin her training as an echo walker, but her newfound abilities attract the attention of dangerous enemies. Meanwhile, in her mundane world, strange incidents begin occurring that threaten to expose the existence of magic to those who aren't ready to believe. This concludes the pilot episode of the Echoing Realms. This story will continue with Lyra's journey of discovery as she learns to master her abilities and faces the growing threat to all the magical realms. Each episode will build upon the last, creating an epic tale of courage, friendship, and the power of believing in yourself, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong.